welcome back to Rockets and Coffee. I am here with Melissa Quinn. Now, Melissa Quinn is a space sustainability crusader, spaceport builder, women in STEM ceiling smasher, and most importantly, a slingshooter. Melissa, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
So can you give me a bit of a background about what Slingshot does?
We do a lot. We're basically a data analytics company specializing in space situational awareness, space domain awareness, and space traffic management. So I'll chat a little bit about what that actually means. But basically, we're eyes on the sky. So we watch what's going on in space. We can see with our optical sensors, so big telescopes that we have all over the world. We can see from low Earth orbit all the way out to cislunar, 24 hours a day, so day and night, which is quite rare for companies like ours. And we take all that data and we fuse it with other data sources that we have. We have a contextual database that has everything back to Sputnik that's ever been launched, and we fuse that with things like space weather data, owner-operator data from spacecrafts that are in space, and we make all that data, which is a lot, actionable. So we fuse it, and we deliver insights to our customers in specific ways that they want to see it. So for instance, if they want to track a specific satellite or an asset in space, maybe their own or maybe an enemy spacecraft, and we'll talk a little bit more about what enemy spacecraft are, and they can see where it's going. They can start to layer on our AI programs, which will predict where it's going as well. And we can maneuver, so we can avoid things like satellites colliding in space, which would pretty much be catastrophic for all of us in the space industry, let alone everybody else on Earth. So we're trying to protect space from these collisions.
How much damage can a tiny piece of space debris do to a satellite in space?
A lot. a lot. So let's put it into perspective a little bit. Our optical telescopes can see about 10 centimeters, so about like a Coke can or bagel size, and we think there's about 25,000 pieces of debris up there that are about that size. Under that size, so anything below 10 centimeters, there's up to 100 million pieces of debris in low Earth orbit, and that's even a paint fleck that might have come off a spacecraft or a rocket body, for instance, can cause huge damage. So I think about almost 10 years ago now, a tiny piece of debris hit a solar panel on a Sentinel spacecraft, one of ESA's spacecraft, and it put a 40-centimeter hole in its solar panel. Oh, wow. These pieces of debris are going, tens of thousands of miles per hour, and they can cause damage.
So if you have all of these satellites in space and they're going around the Earth at 20,000 miles per hour, what are the chances of them colliding with one another?
I think, again, it depends. I think that chance is increasing. We haven't seen anything that has been like catastrophic yet, but we've seen little ones, and they're happening kind of all the time. Sure. So again, I love analogies for the space industry because I think sometimes we kind of get in our little bubble and we think everybody knows what we're talking about. Imagine if you were on the motorway and you're going 22,000 miles an hour, you might have a blindfold on, all the other cars have blindfolds on, some of them are new drivers, like teenagers on the road, provisional many licenses. Of you don't have insurance, and there's not really any like traffic police. That's kind of what and every year more and more cars are being added to that road. I think that's kind of a good analogy. Eventually there's going to be a collision if we don't start to take some of those blindfolds off.
So like the Russian satellite that they had to shelter from on the ISS, that was caused by obviously the satellite causing a debris cloud, is that right?
Yeah, so there's lots of different ways debris can come about. There's the more, I guess, innocent ways, which is maybe the end of a satellite's life, or maybe it just starts to fall apart in certain ways. There's rocket bodies, so stages of rockets that have been launched that break apart to release the spacecraft. And then there's more kind of nefarious activities, let's just say, where they're called anti-satellite testing.
Enemy satellites.
Yes, where they purposely blow up a satellite, and obviously that causes a huge debris cloud.
So why is it that someone would want to do that?
That's a good question. It's a very good question, because we've seen Russia do it, we've seen potentially China do it, and the international community asked that because we're all in this together. It might be the new war-fighting domain, but if we wipe it out with one of these tests, because is it called the Kessler syndrome, where if there's a major collision in space or a major explosion in space, that debris cloud can create more debris cloud and then completely just ruin an entire orbit, which means then those countries can't use it either. So it's a strange thing to do. It really is. But for some reason, it doesn't seem to put them off.
From what I've read, a quarter of all satellites that are in space are dead. So what are we doing about that?
Yeah, I think we did some analysis for 2023, and at the minute there's about 3,000 inactive satellites or dead satellites in space. There's starting to be new things like you have to have deorbiting built into your system, so at the end of its life it deorbits and it burns up in the atmosphere, which has consequences, but I'll leave that for another day.
Not too great for the planet.
But what are we doing about that? So there's a few different things that we need to look at, because these inactive satellites become major pieces of space debris. So it needs to be a kind of a pronged approach. So there's got to be policy and regulation for new ones going up, having that deorbiting capability on them. So this is for low Earth orbit, for instance. Technology changes to the spacecraft. So what you guys are doing here at Pulsar, having propulsion on board, and we've seen an increase in propulsion on even small satellites, which is great because it means they can maneuver away from potential collisions,
other satellites,
and also go into deorbiting. And when they're out in geo orbit, they can use their propulsion to get out to graveyard orbit, so they can get out of the way.
Can we talk about graveyard orbit? Yeah. Because I feel like that's one hell of a term.
So graveyard orbit is a specific orbit just outside of geostationary orbit, and it's where kind of those larger satellites go to die. It is what it says on the tin. And there's kind of traditionally been two ways that you remove satellites. You deorbit them into Earth's atmosphere where it burns up, or you put them out into graveyard if they're further out and a larger satellite.
Right.
But what we're actually starting to see is more and more spacecraft being put out in graveyard, which is great, but actually is now graveyard becoming congested.
Got big graveyards.
So, everything, it just has all this wider context. But just going back to the inactive satellites, so we talked about deorbiting them, we talked about having propulsion, we talked about policy and regulation. What about things like active debris removal, which is what we call it in the industry, which is basically how do we go in and remove those pieces of debris? So there's great companies, even here in the UK, Astroscale and ClearSpace, who are doing that. And they're going and trying to with giant claws, pull them back and get them down to deorbit.
I think I've seen them. They're almost like nets, right?
Yeah,
or
a net, or magnets.
Yeah.
But that is so challenging. Technically, to try and, these things are going so fast to get near it, to then get it and then bring it down to, it's a huge feat to even do that.
Yeah.
And then finally, another thing that I'm really excited about, and there's some world leading companies here in the UK doing it, are things like mechanics in space. So, or fuel stations in space. So you might have heard of a company called Orbit Fab. So a satellite that might be a lot of satellites become inactive because they run out of fuel. So what if there was basically a gas station in space that could go and fuel up?
Yeah.
Or what if there was a mechanic in space that could go and fix, or bring a new part to them?
Yeah.
Or what if we started to manufacture things in space rather than here on Earth, so we're not having to send as much up to space? So there's a lot of different ways that we can look at these.
Yeah. So in the movie WALL-E, when they blast through like the Earth's atmosphere, it's covered in satellites. Would you say that's where we're headed in terms of like space junk?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we're probably almost there if we're not careful in the next few years. I watched it recently with one of my daughters, and it is happening now because unfortunately humans don't have a great track record with some of these things. Like, I like to use the analogy of the sea. In the marine environment, we've dumped stuff in there for years and years and years, and now it's a major issue. There's no ownership of who owns the marine environment. It's the same in space. So a lack of kind of that ownership and that responsibility has led us to, for 50 years, just use it and abuse it in a way where we're putting lots of different things out there, from satellites to rocket bodies to Teslas, for instance, not really thinking about the consequences of the future. And I guess companies like ours are like waking up to the fact that if we don't sort this out now, it will wipe out the use of space for pretty much any company that's interested in going in space, let alone have a massive impact for everybody back here on Earth.
Yeah, sure. So I think with what Slingshot's doing with, tracking all of the satellites and debris and everything that's in space, when a rocket is launching from Earth into space, does it not hit a wall of debris on its way up?
No, not yet.
No.
Pretty much it's okay. I mean, it depends on the rocket, where it's going, how many stages it has, and where it's positioning their spacecraft. So yeah, it does depend, but of course it could have an impact in the future. And we're seeing things like more debris re-entry coming back down to Earth as well. And we can kind of think of it in two ways. There's a lot of debris from space in space, but there's also debris from space coming back down to Earth as well. And that's also having a consequence. So being able to track not what's going on in space and ensuring that the launch operators are safe, but also where some of these pieces of debris are falling back here on Earth too. So we're looking at both. We're looking at in orbit, but we're also looking back here on land and from re-entries too. So it's such a complicated picture, but being able to see what's going on, provide that kind of real-time awareness so that those launch companies can make those decisions is so crucially important. As we're seeing launch just, no pun, but like the trajectory of launch is just insane of what we're going to see in the next decade, let alone even the next 5 years. I think this last year alone we had 3,000 satellites launched, and we're expecting almost 100,000 more to be launched in the next few years. So it's huge, the amount that's going to start going up.
So when it comes to you tracking these satellites, do they have like a natural orbit? And then in terms of this enemy kind of satellite, are you tracking if it moves off of that orbit maliciously? Yes,
we're doing it in a couple different ways. So we are observing, we get about 1 billion observations a day. That is a lot for humans to even, like there's no way any human could monitor that. So that's where AI comes in. And what we're doing now is a couple different things. So we're looking at strange behaviors in space. So maybe the way that, we use our contextual data, say that satellite said it was an Earth observation satellite when it was launched. But we can monitor it and we can see there might be a grappling arm on it.
Right.
So that's a bit weird.
Wait, what's a grappling arm?
So, a satellite that has something that maybe can go and grab another satellite.
Else. Right.
Or that satellite says it's a communication satellite, but it's facing the wrong way. Or it's saddled up next to, and I can use an example, at the end of last year, beginning of this year actually, we tracked out in geo orbit a Russian satellite called Luch, who started to move in a really strange way. And eventually we predicted with our AI that it was going to saddle up right next to a very critical allied communication satellite. And it did. And that, we can put that out openly and say, hey, this is weird. Yeah. Here you go, international community. Here's the data.
Do with it what you like.
Yeah. And then a really, really exciting new AI that we just released a couple of weeks ago is tracking, and this is all sci-fi, totally, but it's real.
We love a bit of sci-fi.
There are very dubious satellites being hidden in constellations at the moment, and trying to figure out what satellites are the bad ones, hiding amongst maybe hundreds, if not thousands of other small satellites, where there's just a tiny little weird characteristic to it that the human eye would never be able to pick up.
And that's where the AI comes in.
Yeah, so that's where the AI, we're getting all this data in, we're fusing it, and we're going, wait a minute. Like that little needle in that haystack over there is acting weird. Yeah. So again, we're able to kind of flag that to the right people, and they can go and do what they need to do.
So for the viewers, satellites that are in space right now, they're responsible for like internet, communications, TV, all kinds of different things. What happens if one of those gets taken out?
Yeah, I think we do a really bad job again in the industry of connecting space to Earth and why it matters in our daily lives. So you mentioned, phones and TV and communications, but it's things like getting emergency services to where they need to be. It's also things like monitoring natural disasters. So right now, where I'm from, Canada, there's wildfires burning everywhere. Being able to track where they're going to get people out and evacuate people, like space has become a fundamental part of our daily lives, and it makes it better, but it also like saves lives.
Yeah.
So if one of these critical satellites went out, even if in a war zone, so how people are communicating to get to safety, like it has huge consequences. And that's why relating it more to people every single day so that they care about it.
Yeah.
And then we can really lobby to get the right responsibilities happening. There's really a lack of legislation and policy for space. So a couple of weeks ago, we saw what happened with Microsoft and the CrowdStrike issue. And, you know, that really caused global chaos. Yeah. That is literally just the tip of the iceberg. If a fundamental communication satellite, a satellite that's maybe letting us take money out of ATMs and the financial systems around the world. So a Kessler syndrome impact, like it would have like huge effects here on Earth. And it's starting to get to the point where it's too late, because it's not just governments up there anymore, it's private individuals who are almost bigger than the countries. Yeah. And so they're kind of doing what they want. Yeah. And sometimes that's great for commercial and, you know, and financial reasons, but sometimes it's not so good. So yeah, now there's actual companies and private individuals that actually have more power in space than a lot of countries do. So it's adding quite a different dynamic to the whole policy and regulation. And I think governments are having to play catch up to where the actually commercial side is. So it's bringing, just a bit of a different kind of take on where we're going. And we have to understand their values and why they're doing what they're doing to be able to get any kind of change happening.
Sure. So on Slingshot's website, it says about Space Neighborhood Watch. Can you tell me what you mean by that?
Yeah, again, I think it's just a great way of explaining something that's really complicated. So for the general public, politicians, people that we need to make these decisions, understand what we actually are doing. Sure. And it is that. It's, you know, we have these abilities to see what's going on in space, and we can call out bad behavior and good behavior. Yeah. And we can do that more and more time efficiently through some of these AI and predicting where things might go, so we can put that out into the international community and flag it so that the right people can go and make the right decisions. And so we called it Neighborhood Watch for that. So we're out there watching, almost a little bit of the Big Brother in space of what is going on, so we can analyze and then identify bad and good behavior. Yeah. And I think there's with kind of the lack of regulation and policy that there is up there, we need to come together as an industry to kind of call each other out in the good and bad ways, transparently. And so I think that's what you're going to start to see, is a lot more of like, this looks dodgy. Yeah. What are we going to do about it?
So it kind of reminds me of in America, where the police all came together to have the different reporting systems for different states. So like you could catch like a serial killer that went across border. So I kind of see Slingshot in a similar way almost, for countries to sort of unite and see that data in one place.
Absolutely. And that's a great question, because that's where we're trying to get to. We want to create a common operating picture. So it's all fine having all this data, and we can actually ingest all our, some of our competitors' data, loads of different kinds. But what does it matter if you can't actually visualize it? Yeah. And other countries can see it in a way that they understand. So you're all looking at the same picture. Yeah. And that's what we're doing. So one of the new products that we have is basically a visualization platform. So we're ingesting all this data, but we're then visualizing it so that these decision makers, no matter where they are in the world, get the same picture. Yeah. And they can see the same things, and they can work together and collaborate together to come up with the right action plan for it. So yeah, it's exactly that. And at the minute, it's just disparate. Lots of people are using different technologies, different kinds of data, and there's no real standard picture of space. Yeah. And that's where we need to get to. That is definitely the next step.
So why is it so important for, governments and countries to be taking that on board right now?
Because we all have, a stake in this. Yeah. From having our own spacecraft in space, so different countries having different capabilities in space and wanting to protect their sovereign capability. But as a global community, we need to work together because we need to protect it, and it can't just be one country trying to do it. And at the minute, it kind of feels like that. It kind of feels like the US is that one country that's putting all the money in and getting all the technology and doing all the regulation, and we need to everybody needs to step up, because space is a global commons.
Yeah.
And it should be used for peaceful purposes to benefit humanity, and it should be there for generations and generations to benefit from.
What does your day-to-day look like at Slingshot?
Oh, it's so different every single day. I'm all over the world.
Yeah.
I'm meeting with customers. I'm trying to get that message across. I'm really lucky to have this incredible technology, but outside of the United States, it's really hard to translate and communicate why it's important.
So it's hugely educational.
A lot of what I do is just meeting with military or civil organizations, politicians, to explain why it's critical that they help, and why they might need a solution like ours to be able to protect their own people and protect their own assets in space. So a lot of that is just that relationship and communicating why it's fundamental. So that's a lot of my day job, which I love. I absolutely love storytelling about space.
Analogies,
because it then creates an awareness of what the problem is, and only then can we start to come up with the solution.
Yeah, sure. So a part of your background is also that you're a Women in STEM ceiling smasher. Can you take me into what that means?
Oh, I could talk to you a whole other episode about this. This is the reason I get up every morning. I was told at a really young age that I wouldn't be able to do anything in space. Not necessarily because I was a woman, but where I grew up, and it took me a lot longer than it probably should have to get to be in the industry. And I have 2 girls, and I think of that every day. Like, they should be able to just walk into a job where they're, evaluated on the performance and talent, not just because they're, not male. And unfortunately, I've been in so many, conferences and speaking things and panels where it's like I'm like a tick box. I'm the only woman, and that's not good enough anymore. And because it's, it's not the right thing to do, but also because I've been in this industry now for probably 12 years. I still hear the same stuff, still the same conversations, still the same ideas. And it's like, until we bring more diverse people into this industry, we're just going to keep coming up with the same solutions. And I'll tell a room of, men that look a certain way this as well, because sorry, but you're not figuring this out. So let's try something different here. Let's bring some different, backgrounds who have different approaches. And so that's what that's about. It's like, let's not just get more women, but people from more diverse backgrounds, a seat at the table, not just in the industry, but at leadership levels, decision-making levels, to help us with these challenges.
Think differently.
I don't want to be sat here in 5 years' time talking about how we're still not doing anything. So that's my real mission. I'm really excited to be involved in lots of different kind of STEM projects. There's a wicked one called Tech Girls, check it out, where it's, helping more and more girls get into things like coding from a young age. And just breaking down stereotypes, that the role models don't have to look a certain way. And that's really important to see. I never had anybody that looked like me come in and talk about working in space. Like, it just, at those early stages, and then create the pipelines for them to come in and open up those opportunities, and then give them support. I had years of being the only woman leading a spaceport, and that gave me this huge profile, but it also gave me massive amount of scrutiny that if I was male I wouldn't have had. And that's ridiculous. So that needs to change as well.
And I also think from a perspective of, women in STEM as well, is not being praised that you've done it just because you are a woman. You should just be good in your own right.
Of course. Of course. And, I'm so lucky that Slingshot, a lot of the leadership team are female, and there's some incredible female scientists on the team.
Oh, it's so cool.
And so I get to work with them, and we just, we do our jobs, and we do it really, really well. And that's got to be the future.
So in terms of the industry, I mean, what's the future of the industry, and what would you want it to look like?
Well, I'd want it to look more like this.
More like this.
More women. I just want it to think about, there is a threat in space. There is like a security, protect and defend mission that we need to take very seriously, 100%. But there's also more of a, democratization of space that we need to look at. And that future of humanity going out, it's going to happen. So how we do that, and opening that up to more people. Everyone should be able to be involved in what goes on in space. We kind of have this global ownership of how we go outwards.
Yeah.
And at the minute, it feels still like it's closed off to a few special billionaires and a few special governments. And it's not. It's all of our futures. We all need to have a say in that.
Yeah.
And so I'd like to see lots of different voices getting involved and understanding where their place is in space. And yeah, just lots of diversity.
So because it's Rockets and Coffee, we ask everybody to bring in their favourite mug. So do you want to tell me a bit about it?
It's really funny when you guys got in touch and said, oh, it's Rockets and Coffee, I was like, well, that's my life. Because I spent 10 years trying to launch rockets, and my husband's a chef and owns cafes, incredible coffee coming out of those cafes down in Cornwall. So those are my two worlds.
Yeah.
It's literally Rockets and Coffee. So yeah, my mug is from Canteen, which is my husband's businesses in Cornwall. He's got
awesome.
2 of them, as well as big events company. So they're just
So
incredible.
it's a family of Rockets and Coffee.
It's a family. He's done coffee in front of rockets for us. Yeah, you can see on my social media some of that, and his as well. But yeah, it's our family thing is coffee. We always have great coffee in the house, and these are the mugs. This is what you find, and actually, it's taken from a graphic of. He does these really long tables. Sure. Socially sustainable is his thing. Like lots of different types of people, different backgrounds from everywhere kind of sat breaking bread at those tables. Yeah. And he actually put him and I on this one.
Aww,
so there you
that.
go. That's us. You can tell it's an iced one in here because it's hot. So yeah, that's Ben and I at Canteen, which is our little home in Cornwall.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. Okay, so my mind is frankly blown. So if anybody else wants to find out any more information about the incredible things that Melissa does, Melissa, where can the viewers find you?
On social media, surprise, surprise. I'm not on TikTok, sorry. That's my teenager would cringe to death. But yeah, on Instagram, you can find me at Mel's Good Space, on Twitter or X or whatever it's called these days. Yeah. LinkedIn, Melissa Quinn, Slingshot Aerospace.com is the company, and if you want to learn anything about the coffee side, that's at Canteen Cornwall. So
amazing.
Go for
Thank
it.
you so much. Well, it's been incredible having you on the podcast, and yeah, remember to comment, like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time.